Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In last week's blog, I talked about 5 serious problems and frustrations that are not addressed for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in intensive care. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to talk about why going to the ward or to die are not the only options to leave intensive care, and why there is a proven third option. In a recent blog post, I wrote about DRGs AO6A and AO6B, both categories for long-term ventilation with tracheostomy in intensive care. It's also the second highest ranking DRGs in terms of costing and expenses, only after LVAD or left ventricular assist device insertion in Australia. Other first world countries have similar costing issues when it comes to long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in intensive care, and the DRGs AO6A and AO6B. Other first world countries, Germany in particular, have therefore adopted a third option for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies to leave intensive care and go home. Current paradigms in intensive care in Australia suggest that a patient either recovers, leaves intensive care and is going to the ward, or if they don't survive their stay in intensive care, they die. This only leaves 2 options and is a very limiting model and limiting mindset for patients' families, for intensive care units, for hospitals and for health funding agencies. When it comes to the care and treatment for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy, Germany has adopted a third option, which is to take patients home and continue care and treatment there, especially if patients are unable to be weaned off the ventilator. Intensive care at home is leaning its service model on the German model of mechanical home ventilation and has created the opportunity for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies to leave intensive care and go home. It's how intensive care units in Germany effectively manage their resources, offer a more holistic patient and family-friendly care model, and massively reduce their expenses for those high-ranking DRGs in terms of costing and expenses. The upside is huge, and it's a win-win situation for all stakeholders. At this point in time, there seems to be unlimited funding for intensive care units in Australia, and there is no or limited accountability in how intensive care units reduce their expenses for the second highest ranking DRGs when it comes to costs and expenses in Australian intensive care units. At this point in time, there also appears to be limited or no accountability for intensive care units in how they improve the quality of life for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies. Besides the costing aspect, improving the quality of life for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies and their families cannot be achieved in an intensive care environment. It can only be achieved in a home care environment with qualified staff and with a specialized service. Germany has proven that this model of intensive home care is working nearly 2 decades ago, and all stakeholders benefit from this model. What are your thoughts? Why do you think that Australian intensive care units still think in outdated paradigms and only offer 2 options for their patients, to either go to a ward or die? Why do you think home care for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies is nearly 20 years behind countries like Germany? Leave your comments on the blog. Please note that intensive care at home has also been selected as a preferred provider for Queensland Health. Please also note that we're currently hiring registered nurses with intensive care experience for a client in Melbourne. You can check out our career section for more information, or you can contact me at Patrick, P-R-T-R-I-K, at intensivecareathome.com.au, or you can call me. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, and I'll see you again next week in another update.